Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
Daniel Thomas Abney Jr., Vesa Juhani Alaculpi, Thomas Allen, James David Ames, Edward Anderson, Norman Joseph Ashton Jr., Barnard Bacon, Samuel Thomas Baker, John Allen Baker, Thomas A. Barrett, James Raybon Barton, Seymour R. Bass, Daniel Warren Beery, Richard James Beck Jr., Mark Bradley Bellin, Robert Eric Belt, Charles Douglas Blair, Dale L. Bloom, Alan Lewis Boney, Ben Dominic Bono, Michael James Bost, Charles Edward Boutry, Joe Eddie Bragg, William Jackson Brewer Jr., Stephen Andre Broquist, Tommy Lee Brown, David Bruner, James Michael Bryan, Thomas Edward Baumgartner, Charles C. Burnett Jr., Frank Kenneth Bush, Davis Carroll Butcher, Reuben Butcher, Tyree Cardwell, Leonard Baldemir Castillo, Willie James Chapman, Stephen C. Chasen, Henry Anthony Chevalier, Ronald Emery Clark, Gary Reed Clodfelter, Freddie Lee Kaufman, Jeffrey Lance Cooper, Ernest Kino Kota, Jimmy Richard Cox, Raymond Kreitz, John Earl Cronin, Edward David Crow, David Newton Cummings, Richard Savage Cunningham, James Stephen Dahl, James Charles Daigle, Michael Francis Dalton, David James Dalton, William Daniels Jr., Michael Chavez Darcy, Edwin Philip Davis, John Sevier Davis, Raymond Warren Demiola, Albert Dean, Robert Bruce DeWine, John DiNapoli Jr., Jose Ramon Diana Diaz, Ronald Thomas Doggett, Gary Mark Dominic,
Joseph L. Duckett Jr., Willard J. DeFresney Jr., Robert K. Everest III, Ronald Walter Farouche, Winfield Scott Flint, Steen Bruce Foster, James William Foos, Joseph Warren Freeman Jr., Michael Kent Fultz, Lawrence Raymond Geiger, Richard Lee Gilbert, Giles Wilson Gilmer, Mark Joseph Giron, Philip Scott Glass, Joseph Hubert Goings Jr., David Robert Gall, Benito Reina Gonzalez, Eric Joseph Greco, Robert John Grothaus II, Richard Joseph Guerrero, Fred Graybiel Guzman, Jr., Frank Lynn Guthrie, Joseph Carlton Haley, William Robert Hale, Charles E. Helford, Donald Kelsey Helverson, Robert Ralph Hammer, Henry Garfield Hampton, Larry Joseph Hardy, Curtis Ray Harris, Richard Warren Hastings, Kenneth Lee Hearn, Edward Francis Heasley, George Glenn Heatherly, Philip Hernandez, John Mitchell Hicks, Robert M. Higginbotham, Sam Holmes, Jr., Johnny Joe Hahn, Michael Allen Huntley, Edward Glenn Huntley, Gerald Richard Huang, Bobby Joe Jacobs, Joseph Arthur Jimenez, Ronnie Wayne Johnson, Daniel Jean Johnson, Lee Francis Jones, Francis Eugene Jordan, Daniel Thomas Joyce, Barry Edwin Carger, Gerald John Kelly, Jr., Daniel Dwayne Keyes, Donald Lewis King, James Joseph Klein, Ronald Wayne Knoski, Lance Jack Kohanke, Stanley John Kopczynski, James Clare Kopsing, Raymond Henry Krug, Jr., Richard Michael Kushik, Donald G. Cusela, Merlin James Labor, Eldon Eugene Lambert, Thomas John Larkin II,
Robert Francis Lawbacher, Elton LeBoeuf, Jr., James Allen Lee, Donnie Gordon Lewis, Joseph Emmett Lilly, James Lee Lewessel, Irvin Lavelle, Louis Cardell Lowe, Robert Ernest Lowe, Michael Henry Lynch, George Jacob Mack, Paul William Malik, James Robert Moyer, Auburn Dale McComb, Leslie Leroy McCorkle, Johnny Lee McDaniel, Dennis Elwood McDonald, William Lewis McGowan, Jimmy Lee McClellan, Jesus Mejia, Michael Dennis Melton, Michael Wayne Milner, James Edward Meyermount, Dennis Patrick Malise, George Wesley Montgomery, Luther Morgan, Jr., Jose Munatones, Jr., George Linwood Mundy, Jr., Robert Dennis Murphy, James Arthur Nicholson, Martin Roy Niemi, Jerry A. Norris, John Michael O'Brien, Dale Lester Otto, Henry Lawrence Owens, Floyd Jr. Parks, Reese Michael Patrick, Derek Wilkerson Patrick, Stephen Tucker Perry, Thomas Joseph Patella, Michael Eugene Peterson, Stephen Jean Pettis, Pat Ellis Phillips, William Wesley Pierce, Charles H. Pilkington, Jr., Donald Maurice Polk, James Portwood, Jr., Stephen Raleigh Powell, Donald Wayne Priest, Jr., Claude Douglas Pullen, Dale Allen Pulliam, Frank Delzil Ralston III, Michael William Rector, Richard Vernon Riggs, James Robert Ringel, Sylvester Martinez Rivera, Daniel Elmer Rosen, Kenneth Dean Rinning, David Brennan Schockner, Wayne Keith Schaltenbrand, Ronald Eugene Schmidt, Alan Dean Scogan, Herman Cerna, Jeffrey Colin Suttlemeyer,
Daniel John Shea, James Francis Smallwood, William Robert Smith, R.J. Smith, James Bryan Smith, Gary Edward Smith, Jack Russell Smith, Winston Osborne Smith, Crawford Snow, Forrest Montgomery Stafford, Darrell Kenneth Stannard, Roger Dean Steffens, Rufus Newton Stevenson, Jr., David Allen Steyer, Kent C. Taylor, Larry Edward Thomas, Jennings Milroy Thompson, James Fred Turney, William Arthur Ulmer, Jr., Raphael Valentin, Donald William Vallon, Jr., Gregory Jerome Vandewall, John Robin Vrabel, Sammy Wayne Waddle, Leroy Wallace, Kenneth Marion Walls, Jr., Curtis Lee Watson, Jr., Doyle Wayne Weaver, Larry Stephen Wheel, Milligan Rudolph Williams, Howard Williams, James Thomas Williams, William John Winters, Larry Virgil Wolfram, Cleveland Guy Winder, Joseph Ray Wynn, Jr., William Henry Ziegler,